Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the JP on Comms YouTube channel, where in today's video we're going to be having another conversational style video, creating conversation and taking a look back over Maidstone United's season and highlighting what could have been really in this Maidstone United National League campaign, which of course has resulted in relegation. Throughout this season, many have highlighted fans, management and ownership alike many issues that have happened on and off the field that have ended up in relegation. Now, it's time in this video to take a look at what I've identified as 4 key regions which Maidstone have faltered in the past 9 months or so that have ended up causing this relegation campaign. Now, the first of which we'll be discussing is going to be recruitment, the second will be injuries, the third will be managerial decisions, and the third is going to be individual errors. Now, let's start off with what I have dubbed Maidstone United's team of the season. Now, before you all go, Joe, how is there a team of the season? We got 25 points in 46 games. Everybody was rubbish. Throw them all away. Start again. I think you're wrong. I think throughout the course of the season, Maidstone have had 11 players who have featured for this side who, if we had them all season, would have kept us up. Now, of course, there's a few different contributing factors to this. Availability, injury, things like that. We're going to get into it. But, of course, we're going to start off with this team very quickly. We're going to just gloss over it and see where I think things could have improved. Now, we're going to start off with the goalkeeper. Ryan Sanford is going to be that goalkeeper. Now, I think he's a fantastic player. We saw it last season in the South. We saw it this season in the National League. Both stints he had with us, he was fantastic. A very good goalkeeper, a great all-rounder. Didn't really falter in any department. And, of course, Maidstone has struggled desperately with goalkeepers this season. Tom Hadler has very rarely featured in this side, but when he has made a significant number of mistakes. Could that be down to rustiness? Could that be down to confidence? Could it be down to maybe just lacking the quality for the National League? And the same goes for Yusuf Mersin. I think, too many mistakes, too little confidence in himself. And I think Dan Barden was an upgrade on both of those, but still wasn't Ryan Sanford for me. Now, if we'd had Ryan Sanford from the start of the season and he'd been fit all season, I think that revolutionises our side. Maidstone have, of course, got some individually very good defenders in the side, yet we've shipped 104 goals just in the National League this season, which is more than Dover last year. And Dover, although playing 2 games less throughout the season, got 1 point. They got 13 points, but started off with minus 12, and they only had really a handful of senior players in the side. A very, very weak squad, and ended up with less goals conceded than us this season. Now, I think that mainly can be down to the goalkeeper. Of course, we'll get on to managerial decisions a little bit later on that may have contributed to that as well. But for me, if we had a good goalkeeper in this season, it would have alleviated a lot of our problems. And unfortunately, Sanford's injury was a key contributor in us losing out in that department. But I think if we got him in first thing of the season, we would have been better off. George Fowler, Reece Greenwich, Sam Bone and Ryan Galvin are going to make up my defence. Now, I think if we'd had this back 4 for the entire season from the Altrincham away game back in August, again, I think we would have conceded a lot less goals. We would have had a significant amount of more structure. I think, George Fowler would have continued to have a very good season. Reece Greenwich and Sam Bone, of course, weren't with us at the start of the season. Neither was Ryan Galvin, but both of these players, I believe, were available at the start of the season. I think Reece Greenwich had been released from Barnet. I do think that he would have been someone we could have looked at getting in first thing in the season, but we opted for the likes of Jack Cooley, who of course did not perform as we would have hoped. The same goes for Sam Bone, someone who of course loves Maidstone, a town that he spent a lot of time in growing up. Clearly had that desire to return to the town, and I think if we'd gone in for him, and we would have very likely been interested in him at the start of the season, considering we signed him halfway through, we would have had our eyes on him for a while. So I think if we brought him in early doors, again, knowing that Joel was getting a bit older, knowing that even at his best, he wasn't the quickest player in the world, and that step up to the National League it's a big jump from the National South. I mean, a lot more pace, a lot more intensity, and I think it's fair to say at times this season Joel Holt maybe didn't look up to that. Same goes for Jack Cooley. He looked off the pace at times too. And I think if we'd had Greenwich and Bonin from the start, we would have been a lot better off. And again, that comes down to recruitment. That comes down to managerial decisions, deciding who to go for. Did we just opt for an easier deal in Jack Cooley, someone who's more local, going to take less wages than Bone and Greenwich most likely? So for me, I think there was some fault there. Ryan Galvin, of course, someone we could have potentially had on loan from the start of the season. But again, I want to highlight that left-back position as an area of weakness. Jerome Binnon-Williams, of course, injured right at the start of the season. Ended up starting, I believe it was Liam Vincent against Altrincham on day one. But that was not a solid replacement. And I think, again, managerial decisions, recruitment, all comes down to these things. The midfield, Regan Booty, Sam Corn and Shamar Lawson. Now, again, 3 different types of player in this midfield, 3 different reasons, I believe, as to why we did not see the best out of them this season. Sam Corn, of course, injured. Maybe not too much we could have done about that one, but Shamar Lawson, fantastic player. Again, could we have got him in at an earlier stage of the season? Could he have featured more in the time he was with us? Was it too far gone by that point? It's hard to say, but again, looking at adequate replacements for people that are leaving, we never really replaced Michael Phillips going, and that brings me on to Regan Booty. Forced into a deeper role this season, of course did play quite well at times, but I think even Regan would say there were games this season where he was not up to his own standard, and I think that has cost us at points. I don't think it's obviously Regan's fault. No replacement for Michael Phillips, an anchor man in the midfield, someone who is much more deep than Corn and Booty were last season, someone who wins the ball back. I mean, that's not Regan's game, but he was forced into that this year, and I think that really let us down. That forced him to be deeper, not as creative, maybe not as confident in how he's going to perform in a game, and that, of course, will have cost us throughout the season. Then the front line, of course, has been a weak point this season, to be fair. We've lost Jack Barham. Of course, Rory Deacon has featured a lot, had a really good start to the season, but basically we've had Luque out the whole season, we've had Sol out the whole season, and we didn't really strengthen knowing that these two were going to have recurring injury problems. Now, Sol, I think we would have known relatively quickly, probably around the September-October time, that this was going to be a bit of an ongoing issue. Maybe not as long as it was, but again, I think preparation should have been made and players should have been brought in to help alleviate that injury woe that he has. Same with Luque. I think Sol was probably the Luque replacement for the season. But of course, with his own injury problems, we would have had to go back in again and get someone else. Now, Shawnee Barre is someone I've put in this team of the season because I think if we got him in very early on, and remember, he was available very early on, released at the start of the season, did end up, I believe, at Cheshunt, something like that, in the south last season, and was available. But again, it's maybe not just Shawnee Barre, it's someone of that ilk, someone who is able to perform and cover where necessary. And I think, again, these failings by management, the club, whoever you want to pin this blame on, has ultimately let us down throughout this season. We've had injuries, but we haven't necessarily invested as wisely as possible. I think the recruitment last summer was very, very poor, if I'm being honest. Jack Cooley, Hadi Gandor, James Alabi, Henry Woods all had poor seasons. I suppose Woods can't really help the injuries, but again, many will argue that when he did play, he didn't excel. I think Sol is the only player who's performed very well this season, but again, injured for way too long. Was that something we should have been aware of before signing him? Was this a potential issue? Did we do our due diligence? I don't know. So that's my team of the season there. Taking a look at those players there's a lot of failings in recruitment, injuries, managerial decisions in who we bought in. Did we opt for players who may have been an easier buy than players who were of a significantly higher quality. Again, this is what this video is all about, creating that conversation, having these discussions, bringing up these weak points in how things have gone this season. Now, the second thing I want to get onto is injuries specifically. Now, as I said earlier on, at any given time, 1/3 of Maidstone's playing budget, wage-wise, I believe, has been out injured. So, again, it comes down to due diligence. We didn't have this last season. We did have players have knocks. We did have players miss a few games here, a few games there. Sam Corn had a couple of knocks last season, I believe. We saw Jerome Binnon-Williams out for a little bit as well. You know, Jack Barham had a significant period out with injury at the start of the season. But we haven't been as heavily affected last time round as we were this time round. Now, is that due to intensity? Is that due to recruitment? A lot of the players we have signed have spent a lot of time out injured. Sol, Cooley, Woods, Gandor, of course. You know, that's 4 of our 5 signings last summer who have had multiple month injuries at a time. Now, again, it comes down to due diligence. Is it the responsibility of a manager? Is it the responsibility of his staff? Is it the responsibility of the ownership to look into these players, to understand how the transition is going to be from maybe not playing as many games as they were at their old club, like Jack Corley, very much a rotational player before we signed him, and expect him to come in and play 90 minutes every week in a very fast, very high intensity, competitive National League side. It's maybe unreasonable to expect that, and I think we should have been looking at players who, although maybe not guaranteed quality, were certainly able to play a lot of games. I know a lot of people in the past have said, I'd rather have a 6 or 7 out of 10 player every game of the season than a 10 out of 10 player for only, half of the season, because ultimately, if you're not playing games, you're not contributing to the side. And that is something that Maidstone have suffered from immensely this season. And I think it's due to a combination of things. I mean, some have argued that getting rid of Beth Cooper halfway through the season was a bad thing to do. We needed to have more people responsible for injuries. Some have argued that her replacement was better, in dealing with injuries and getting people back to fitness. There's arguments to be had there. Could perhaps both of them have combined their efforts to perhaps create a more conducive environment in which injuries were easier to recover from? I don't know. But again, that's what this type of video is all about. Looking back, reflecting on last season, seeing where mistakes could have been made and how things could have gone differently. It's very fine margins throughout this season that I believe have cost Maidstone, and combination of fine margins in these 4 categories I've highlighted have ultimately created a much bigger problem, which has saw us relegated by more than 20 points. So taking a little look now at the injured players in particular, we've got Sam Corn, Reece Greenwich, Luque, Sanford, Jerome Binnon-Williams, Hoyt, Sol and Henry Woods. They're players for me who, all if fit for the whole season, would have contributed significantly to this side. I think if we'd had Greenwich for a good 5-6 months of the season, Luque for a season, Corn for the last 5-6 months, Sanford for the season, JBW and Hoyt for the season, fit and firing, Sol and Woods as well, being accompanying players to last season's squad, we would have seen a lot better results. We surely would have seen a lot more of a cohesive unit. We would have seen the team not chopped and changed as much, and that's what's going to lead me onto my next point: managerial decisions. Now, many times this season we've seen the team chopped and changed around. I know on the Notts County commentary, I believe it was, or maybe it was the Chesterfield commentary, that's it, the Chesterfield commentary with Nigel and Sean, last game of the season, we did of course hear Sean talk about how with Hoyt returning and Burko playing at left back, it's the first time since the first day of the season where Maidstone have had a full back four with players playing in their natural positions. Now, when Hoyt got injured at the start of the season, or well, halfway through the season, we never really replaced him. Same with Jerome Williams, continuous injuries throughout the year, which of course is unfortunate, but we never really went out and got that surefire replacement. Now, we opted instead with a cheaper option. Let's be honest, we got in a cheap loan player in Liam Vincent to play at left back, who we ultimately decided wasn't good enough. We've ended up playing Rory Deacon at fullback many times this season, Bhivesh Gurung at fullback many times this season, and George Fowler's made somewhat of a permanent move over to right back. Now, he's still managed to pick up Supporters Player of the Year, but he should have been playing centre-back. He does, in my opinion, lack the qualities necessary to be an incredibly successful right-back. Don't get me wrong, he was a very good right-back this season. But in terms of his ability on the ball, delivering crosses, beating a man on the dribble, that's not his area of strength. His area of strength is recovery pace, interceptions, reading of the game. In a defensive sense, very impressed with him. In an attacking sense, we could have looked for better options, and not replacing those players and opting for cheaper solutions to these issues has ultimately again contributed to the downfall of this Maidstone side. And you've got to ask the question of where this stems from. Was it a Hakan Hayret decision to keep George Fowler at right back instead of replacing Gavin Hoyt? Was it looking higher up? Was it maybe the ownership had said, well, there's no money there, we can't replace these players. You can have Liam Vincent on loan, which I assume would have been a pretty cheap deal back then at the start of the year, but ultimately, who does the blame fall on? And I think it's important to ask these questions, because without it, you're prone to making those mistakes again. I think we can't see that next season. I think if a player gets an injury which is significant, or for whatever reason ends up leaving the team, the replacement has to be a long-term solution, because we can't just look at a player getting injured for 2 months and go, okay, we'll get a player in for 2 months, because what happens if that player gets injured again? Are we going to get another different player in for 2 months, or are we going to have a backup solution in permanently who's going to know the role, know the team, and be able to apply himself if necessary when he's called up to the squad? If, for example, Rafe Brown had been fit all season when Jerome Williams had been out of the side on multiple recurring injuries, he would have been familiar with the squad, he would have been capable of playing that position, and he would have been familiar with the role. Now, again, unfortunately, Rafe Brown has been out all season, but we knew that at the start of the year, Rafe Brown was a very injury-prone player, and it was only about halfway through the season where this injury woe of his was actually resolved. So what we need to do next season, in my opinion, is learn from these mistakes, and should a player get an injury, we should have an adequate replacement with a long-term solution, because it's not uncommon for this Maidstone side in this last 12 months or so to see long-term injuries and recurring injuries. And like I say, I think we need to prepare better for that. Again, looking at managerial decisions, a lot of times things have boiled down to very simple changes in games. Things like substitutions have been very poor this season. I think everybody will agree on that. Last year in the South, won us games, won us the league substitutions. Hakan Terry's super subs, Christy Patterson coming off the bench week in, week out, Dom Adesanya coming off the bench, winning us games on their own at times, really contributed to the success of this team. And unfortunately, that didn't pay off this season. The options we had on the bench weren't of a high enough quality, weren't of a suitable level of fitness, and ultimately were coming on at the wrong time in games. I spoke to somebody at Alex Flisher's testimonial who had a very strong opinion on substitutions at times made throughout this season by not just Hakan and Terry, but also George Elokobi and his managerial team, that contributed negatively to the side, and making subs at the wrong time, making subs for the sake of making subs. You know, we might have been doing all right, chuck a player on to change it up a bit, but ultimately they'd end up losing us the game. I remember Hadi Gandour being subbed on at one point. I can't remember whether it was this season or last, but he came on, gave the ball away within a minute and cost us a goal. And that was just a very, very quick summary of Maidstone's time this season. I mean, looking at those substitutions, those poor decisions at crucial times in games have cost us points, and it's very, very simple to rectify that. You know, better assessment of games and more experience, especially in George's case. Learning the trade is obviously something he's yet to do, but that will come in time. If he can make better substitutions next season and in following seasons, we'll benefit more from that. I think we need to have players who are ready to come on as well, players who we know are quality, players who are rivaling those in the starting lineup, because let's be honest, at points this season, you look at those on the bench and think there's no way for you to get into this starting team. As poor as it's been, you are a bench player for Maidstone. And for me, you need to have players on the bench who could start. Players who, again, through very fine margins, are just missing out on a place in the starting lineup. And it's that competition that pushes everyone to be better. And I think that ultimately we failed in that sense. I think our backups at times were not good enough. I think our decisions on when to bring them on were not good enough. I think if we'd had players coming on earlier, we would have seen them make more of an impact. If we'd seen them coming on later, we would have seen them having less of an impact in terms of negatively on the game, or not coming on at all. So that is something I wanted to highlight, and we need to learn from for next season too. And finally, individual errors. Now, I've gone through every game in the National League this season, and I've highlighted 20 points that I believe we could have picked up. Now, I'm going back pretty much backwards through the season here. There's a couple times I've chopped and changed, but Bromley, I think we could have got a draw. Woking, a draw. Barnet, a draw. EC, a draw. Chesterfield, a draw. Dorking, a draw. Woking, a draw again. Scunthorpe, a win. Gateshead, a win. Dorking, a win. And Maidstone, a win. Now, unless I've missed one out that I've got written down here, that's 20 points extra we could have accrued throughout the season. Now, if you look at how games have gone for us in terms of individual errors, all of these points that I've highlighted here were dropped because of red cards, individual errors leading to a goal, or managerial decisions, sort of positional stuff, lack of awareness, lack of a cohesive unit. And these individual performances that have happened at times, own goals as well, I've thrown in there, that have cost us points this season, have all contributed to us halving our points, really. If we had 45 points, okay, we wouldn't have stayed up, but we would have been in that race. And if we got wins at crucial points in the season here, such as the Dorking away game, in which we lost because of two Bobby Joe Taylor headers in the dying moments of the game, we got a red card in that game as well. If we didn't get that red card, we didn't make those individual errors to sleep on the fact that one of the smallest players on the entire pitch, not just on the opposition team, the entire pitch, was winning two open headers in the box. We could have got on a run from that. If we'd beaten Dorking, broke the hoodoo from last season of 2 losses against them last year, I think we could have been much better off. That would have led us on better runs. That would have ended negative spells. Again, dropping points to Maidstone. We ended up drawing that game in the last minute because their captain scored a goal, which was poorly defended from a throw-in. Woking, we saw an injury happen to Sandford, I believe. Mersing comes on and the game falls apart. The lack of confidence in the side on one of their teammates just capitulated the side, and that cannot happen. Players have to take responsibility for that. Whether you as an individual believe Mersing is good enough or not, that should not give you the ability to drop off in a game. Okay, yes, you might not be as confident in the standard Mersing might have in his general play, but, you know, compared to Sandford, there's not many players who would. you have to have the faith in your own ability to alleviate the pressure from someone coming on off the bench so early on in a game. Mercian in that game made a couple of mistakes, and if we played with more confidence, that couldn't have been an issue. And again, that happens so many times throughout the season. I think a lot of responsibility has to be taken on by players. Red cards at silly times. Again, in the Dorking home game, Sam Corn picks himself up a red card for dissent towards the referee. And it's things like that which have cost us points this season and could have broken bad runs for us. Now, unfortunately, that's cost us this year. Hopefully it won't next year. Hopefully we'll learn from that. We won't make those mistakes again and we'll be much better off because of it. So that is going to be my summary of those 4 points. Recruitment, injury, managerial decisions, and individual errors. A lot to learn from in this season across the board, from a playing staff level all the way up to the board room. Now, thank you all so much for watching. This video, of course, is Creating Conversation. It is all about your opinions as much as mine. So please leave your thoughts down below on any of the points I've made in this video. Do subscribe to the channel as well if you do like the content. There's going to be plenty more coming in this off season. And of course, do like this video if you did enjoy. So thank you all so very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.